My parents abandoned me at 12 and laughed. 20 years later, they needed me to save them. I want to tell you about a Tuesday morning in September. I'm standing in the doorway of a hospital room in Portland, Oregon. I'm 34 years old. I'm wearing scrubs and a white coat with my name embroidered on the chest. My stethoscope is around my neck. I've been on shift for 9 hours and I have 3 more to go. The patient in the bed is my father. He doesn't recognize me at first. He's been sedated and his eyes are glassy, and he looks smaller than I remember him. Smaller and older, and genuinely frightened in a way I have never seen before. Then his vision clears, and he focuses on my face and his mouth opens, and he says a name. Not my name, my old name. The name I stopped using when I was 14 years old. Jenna, I haven't heard that name in 20 years. It lands in my chest like something physical. I walked to the side of his bed. I checked his chart. I reviewed his vitals. I did everything a physician does when they enter a patient's room, methodically and without rushing, because that is what the situation required. And then I looked at my father, this man who had driven away from a resort in Cancún, Mexico, on a July afternoon 22 years ago, laughing, while his 12-year-old daughter stood on the sidewalk and watched his rental car disappear. And I said, "It's Dr. Vasquez now. Let's talk about your treatment plan." My name is Sophia. I'm 34 years old. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of the 22 years between that sidewalk in Cancun and that hospital room in Portland. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, because this one, it doesn't end the way anyone expected. Let me tell you what my family looked like from the outside. We lived in a 3-bedroom house in Sacramento, California. My father, Eduardo, was a regional manager for a mid-sized logistics company. My mother, Claudia, taught elementary school. We went to church on Sundays. We took a vacation every summer. In the neighborhood, we were the family with the neat lawn and the holiday decorations, and the daughter who got good grades. Inside the house, things were different. My parents had a theory about parenting. They called it building character. What it meant in practice was this: comfort was weakness, asking for help was begging, and the purpose of difficulty was not to be solved, but to be endured. If I cried when I was hurt, I was being dramatic. If I asked for something I needed, I was being spoiled. If I struggled with something at school, I was told that struggling was good for me, and that they weren't going to make it easier. They were not violent people. I want to be precise about that. They did not hit me. They did not scream. What they did was colder than that and harder to name for a child who had no other reference point. They withheld warmth, comfort, reassurance, the basic parental instinct to make a frightened child feel safe. All of it withheld, consistently in the name of preparing me for a world that, they promised, would be far less forgiving than they were. My younger brother Marco was different. He was 4 years younger, quieter, more anxious, and my parents' approach to him was inexplicably gentle. When Marco cried, my mother held him. When Marco struggled, my father helped. When Marco needed something, it appeared. I was 8 years old before I understood that this disparity was not normal. I understood it because a friend's mother came to pick her up from our house one afternoon, and I watched her hug my friend in the doorway. A quick, absent-minded hug, just the casual affection of a parent greeting a child. And something in me went very still. I had never been hugged like that, not once that I could remember. I became excellent at school because it was the one arena where performance was measurable, and praise, however brief, was occasionally granted. I won a science fair when I was 10. My father said, "That's good," and went back to his newspaper. I kept the ribbon in a box under my bed for years. The summer I turned 12, my parents announced we were going to Cancun for a week. Marco was excited. I was cautiously hopeful in the way a child is when she has learned not to expect too much, but cannot quite stop herself from wanting it anyway. The first 3 days were fine. The resort was large and there were other families everywhere, and in public my parents performed the version of themselves they showed the world. Relaxed, attentive, normal. I swam in the pool. I ate food I had never tried before. I let myself believe for 72 hours that maybe this was a reset. Maybe this was the family we were going to be from now on. I was wrong. Drop a broken heart in the comments if you already know where this is going. On the 4th day, we went to a market in the town center, about 20 minutes from the resort by taxi. It was busy and loud and full of color. Vendors selling food and clothing and souvenirs, tourists moving in clusters, music from somewhere I couldn't locate. I had never been anywhere like it. I was overwhelmed in the way a 12-year-old is overwhelmed by a foreign city. Not frightened exactly, just aware of how large and unfamiliar everything was. My parents stopped at a vendor near the center of the market. I was looking at a display of painted tiles a few stalls away, maybe 15 feet from them, close enough to see them clearly. My father said something to my mother. She laughed. He said something else. She laughed again. Then they turned and walked in the opposite direction. I thought they hadn't seen me. I moved to follow them, but they were walking quickly and deliberately, not browsing, not stopping, just moving. I called out. My father glanced back over his shoulder. He saw me. He kept walking. I ran to catch up. By the time I reached the edge of the market, they were getting into a taxi. I could see them through the window. My mother was saying something to the driver. My father was looking straight ahead. I banged on the window. My father turned and looked at me. He smiled. Then he held up one hand, not a wave, more like a gesture, and the taxi pulled into traffic. I stood on that sidewalk for a long time. I had approximately 400 pesos in my pocket, which my parents had given me that morning for souvenirs. I had no phone. This was 2004, and we had not brought an international plan. I did not know the name of our resort with any certainty, only that it was large and white and near the beach. I did not speak more than a few words of Spanish. I was 12 years old, alone in a foreign country, and my parents had just driven away. For the first hour, I told myself they were coming back, that it was a test, one of their character-building exercises that would end with them returning and telling me I had passed. I stayed on the sidewalk near where the taxi had been. I watched every vehicle that passed. By the second hour, I stopped believing that. I do not want to spend too long on what the next several hours felt like because I think anyone who has ever been truly alone and frightened, especially as a child, already knows. It is a specific kind of fear that doesn't announce itself dramatically. It is quiet and total, and it changes something in you that does not fully change back. What saved me was a woman named Esperanza, who worked at a small restaurant near the market and who noticed me sitting on the curb outside for the better part of an hour. She came out and crouched down beside me and asked, in careful English, if I was lost. I told her what had happened, not all of it. I didn't have the words for all of it, but enough. Esperanza brought me inside and gave me food and water and used the restaurant's phone to call the tourist police. 2 officers came within 30 minutes. They were kind in the efficient, practiced way of people who have seen this before, more often than they should have to. It took 3 hours to locate my parents. They were at the resort pool. The officer who spoke to my mother told me later, without meaning to, that her first response when she was informed I had been found was to ask if she needed to come to the police station or if they could bring me to the resort. She asked if they could bring me to the resort. Type angry in the comments, because honestly, I still am, a little. My parents' explanation delivered that evening in the hotel room was this. They had wanted to see if I could handle an unexpected situation. They had stayed nearby. This was not true. They had been at the resort. And they had known I would be fine because I was resourceful and capable. And this was exactly the kind of experience that would serve me later in life. My father said, "See, you figured it out." I was 12. I sat on the hotel bed and I looked at him and I felt something happen in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. I know now what it was. It was the death of something. The last remaining version of the hope that my parents were going to become different people. We flew home 2 days later. Nothing was said about what had happened. It was simply over, filed away, presumably into the same category as the mall incident when I was 8, and the parking lot when I was 10, and every other lesson that had gone unremarked afterward. I went back to school in September. I got straight A's. I joined every extracurricular I could because every extracurricular was hours I did not have to spend at home. I found a biology teacher named Mr. Okafor who recognized something in me that I had not yet recognized in myself and who told me with the quiet conviction of someone who had taught for a long time that I was going to do something important with my mind. I held on to that sentence the way I had held on to the science fair ribbon. It was something. At 14, I told my parents I was going by my middle name, Sophia, instead of Jenna. My mother said it was a phase. My father didn't respond at all. Neither of them used the new name. I used it everywhere else. At school, with friends, on every form and application I filled out from that point forward. I was building a different version of myself, quietly, methodically, one decision at a time. I graduated valedictorian. I applied to colleges without asking my parents for help, because asking for help had never produced help. I received a full academic scholarship to UC Davis. My parents came to my high school graduation. My father shook my hand. My mother said, "We're proud of you," in a tone that suggested she was reading from a script. I left for Davis that September and I did not look back. Over the next 12 years, I completed my undergraduate degree in biology, my medical school at UCSF, and my residency in internal medicine at a hospital in Portland. I worked harder than I had ever worked at anything. I built a life that was entirely mine, an apartment I chose, friends I selected for their kindness and their honesty, a small community of people who knew my real name and my real history and had chosen to stay anyway. My parents and I spoke perhaps 4 times a year, brief surface-level calls that conveyed nothing and asked nothing. I sent cards on holidays. They sent cards on my birthday. We were strangers who shared a last name and a history neither of us had processed. I had made peace with this. Not the happy peace of resolution, the functional peace of someone who has stopped waiting for something that is not coming. Then my phone rang on a Tuesday morning in September. The call was from Marco. My brother and I had a complicated relationship, the specific complication of two people shaped by the same household in completely different ways, one of whom had been protected and one of whom had not. We were not close, but we were not estranged. We spoke occasionally. He was the only thread I kept to that world. "Dad had a cardiac event," Marco said. "He's been admitted to Portland General." Of all the hospitals in all the cities, Portland General was where I worked. I asked which unit. Marco told me. I knew the unit. I knew the attending on call that morning. I had walked those halls hundreds of times. "Mom is here too," Marco said carefully. "She's been having some symptoms. They're running tests." I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because I watched the time on my dashboard. I thought about what I was going to do, not whether I was going to do it. That was never a question. I had taken an oath. My father was a patient. Whatever had happened between us was not relevant in that room. But I was also a human being who had stood on a sidewalk in Cancún at 12 years old, and I was going to have to walk into a room with the person who had driven away. 4 minutes. Then I got out of the car. My father's situation was serious, but not immediately life-threatening. A significant arrhythmia that required monitoring and medication adjustment, and potentially a procedure if it didn't stabilize. My mother's tests came back showing early-stage hypertension and some concerning indicators around kidney function that needed follow-up. Neither condition was beyond management. Both required careful, competent medical attention over the coming days. I was the internist on call. I reviewed my father's chart before I entered his room. I reviewed my mother's preliminary results. I did what I always do before a difficult patient interaction. I set everything else aside, not permanently, just outside the door, to be picked up again later. This was a skill I had developed over years of training, and it served me well in most situations. It served me in this one too. Mostly. Stay with me. Because what happened when I walked through that door is something I have thought about almost every day since. My father didn't recognize me at first, as I told you at the beginning of this story. When he did, when his eyes focused and he said my old name, Jenna, something happened in the room. Marco, who was sitting in the corner, went very still. A nurse who was adjusting an IV line looked up and then looked carefully away. "It's Dr. Vasquez now," I said. "Let's talk about your treatment plan." I explained his condition clearly and completely. I answered his questions. I told him what the next 48 hours would look like and what we were monitoring for. I was, as best I could be, exactly the physician he needed me to be. My father listened. He nodded. He asked one question about the procedure timeline, and I answered it. And then, as I was preparing to leave, he said, "You became a doctor." "Yes." "We didn't know." I looked at him. "You have my number, Dad. You've had it for 12 years. He didn't say anything. I left. My mother's room was harder. She was more alert than my father, less disoriented, and she had had time, probably since Marco had told her I was working in this hospital, to prepare something. She had an expression I recognized from childhood, the expression she wore when she was about to reframe a situation. "Sophia," she said. She used the right name. That was deliberate. "Mom!" I reviewed her chart. I explained her results. "I want to talk about more than the results," she said. "Right now I'm your physician," I said. "There's time for other conversations later." "Is there?" she asked. And the way she said it, not manipulatively, just tiredly, the exhaustion of someone who understood exactly what she was asking, made me pause for a moment longer than I meant to. I finished reviewing her chart. I told her what the follow-up would involve. I told her I would check in again that evening. At the door, I stopped. I didn't turn around. I said, "You used my name." "Yes," she said. "It's been 20 years. A pause. "I know." I left. In the hallway, I stood for a moment with my hand on the wall, and I breathed the way they teach you to breathe when something is trying to take you under. In through the nose, out through the mouth, 4 counts each. Then I went to see my next patient. Type yes, if you think she deserved more than that. Because honestly, I went back and forth on it for a long time. My father was in the hospital for 4 days. My mother was discharged after 2 with a follow-up plan. On the 3rd day, when my father's condition had stabilized and he was alert and out of immediate danger, I came to his room on my own time. Not as his physician, I had arranged for a colleague to take over his direct care, to avoid any conflict of interest, something I should have done from the start and had been too stunned to organize immediately. I came as his daughter. Marco was not there. I had asked him to give us an hour. I sat in the chair beside the bed. My father looked at me for a long moment. He looked like a man who had been carrying something for a very long time and was tired of the wait. "Cancún," he said. It was not a question. Yes. "I've thought about it," he said. "More than you might think." "What did you decide?" He was quiet for a moment. That we were wrong. That what we called building character was... He stopped, started again. That we hurt you in ways we told ourselves were good for you, and they weren't. I had imagined this conversation many times over many years. In some versions, I said things I had been carrying since I was 12. In others, I was cold and clinical and gave him nothing. In the version that actually happened, I sat in that chair and I felt something shift. Not resolve, not heal, but shift. Like a weight redistributing itself into a shape that was slightly easier to carry. "I needed you to protect me," I said. "That's all I ever needed, and you didn't." "No," he said, "we didn't." My mother came to my office the following week. She knocked. She waited to be invited in. She sat down across from my desk with her hands in her lap, and she looked at me the way people look when they have rehearsed something and are not sure the rehearsal was adequate. She said, "I have been trying to find the right words for 20 years. I don't think there are right words. I think I just have to say the wrong ones and hope you'll hear what's underneath them." Then she apologized. Not with qualifications, not with explanations that shaded toward excuses. She said, "I am sorry for Cancún. I am sorry for every time before Cancún and after it. I am sorry that we called cruelty a lesson and told ourselves it made you stronger. You became strong in spite of us, not because of us. I know the difference. I have always known the difference. I did not forgive her in that office. Forgiveness is not a switch, and I am not going to pretend it is. But I listened, and I believed her, and I told her that I needed time, and that time was what I was willing to offer. She said that was more than she deserved. I told her she was probably right. She almost smiled. For the first time in my memory, the almost smile reached her eyes. It has been 14 months since my father's hospitalization. He had the procedure. He recovered. His arrhythmia is managed. He calls me every 2 weeks, not every week. I asked for that boundary, and he has respected it. The calls are short and careful and contain more honesty than anything that passed between us in the previous 20 years. He asks about my work. He asks about my life. He does not ask me to forgive him, which is the thing that makes me most inclined to consider it. My mother and I meet for lunch once a month. We are not close in the way I might have wanted when I was 8 years old and watching other mothers hug their children. We are close in the way that two people can be close when they have agreed to see each other clearly rather than through the version each of them preferred. It is imperfect and real, and I have decided that imperfect and real is enough. Marco is finding his own version of all of this. He was shaped by my parents, too, differently, and the reckoning he is doing is his own. We talk more now than we used to. That feels like something. I think about Esperanza sometimes, the woman who came out of her restaurant and crouched down beside a frightened 12-year-old on a sidewalk in Cancun. I have tried to find her. Not seriously, not with investigators, just the quiet internet searches of someone who wants to say thank you and has no way to do it. I haven't found her. I hope her life has been good. I hope she knows that what she did in 5 minutes on an ordinary afternoon mattered more than she could possibly have understood. The thing I most want to say, the thing I keep coming back to, is about the story my parents told themselves. They believed they were building something in me. Resilience, self-sufficiency, the ability to withstand difficulty. And they were not entirely wrong that those things developed. But here is what they missed. Those things developed because of what they put me through, not because of what they gave me. There is a difference between a person who is strong because they were supported and a person who is strong because they had no other option. My parents produced the second kind and called it the first. I am strong. I am a physician. I have a life I built from nothing with my own hands because I had no alternative. I am proud of that life. I am also someone who spent 20 years wondering what it would have felt like to be held by a parent the way my friend was held in that doorway when I was 8 years old. To have someone just reflexively, automatically pull you toward them and keep you safe. Both of those things are true at once. The strength and the wound. I have learned to hold them both without letting either one erase the other. If you are carrying something like this, a family that named harm as love, a childhood that produced endurance by withdrawing safety, I want you to hear this. What happened to you was not a curriculum. It was not designed for your benefit. Whatever you built in spite of it is yours, fully and completely, And if the people who hurt you eventually come looking, in a hospital room, in an office doorway, across a lunch table, you are the one who decides what they find. I decided they would find a physician, a person with a name they had never used, a life they had never seen coming. That was enough. Last month, my father came to Portland for a follow-up appointment. My colleague handled the medical side. I met him afterward for coffee. We sat at a small table near the window. It was raining, which is Portland's default setting. He ordered the same thing I ordered, which I don't think was intentional, but made me smile anyway. He told me about a trip he and my mother were planning. Nothing exotic. A drive down the coast, a few nights in small towns, the kind of quiet trip people take when they've decided to pay attention to things they spent years passing by. We went back to Cancún, he said, last spring. I looked at him. We found the market, where He stopped. We stood on that sidewalk for a while, just stood there. I didn't say anything. I don't know what I expected to feel, he said. I thought maybe it would make it smaller somehow. It didn't. No, I said. It wouldn't. We finished our coffee. He put on his coat. At the door, he paused and turned back, and he did something he had never once done in my childhood. He put his arms around me, briefly, awkwardly, like a person who has never learned the gesture and is trying to perform it from memory rather than instinct. It was not the hug I had wanted at 8 years old. It was not the reflex, the automatic safety of a parent who has always done this. But it was real, and it was his, and it was 22 years late, and it was here. I let him hug me. Then I stepped back and told him to drive safely and watched him walk out into the Portland rain. My name is Sofia Vasquez. I am 34 years old. I am a physician. I am someone's daughter, imperfectly and honestly for the first time. That is the whole story, and it is, finally, mine. If this story meant something to you, if it found you at a moment when you needed it, leave me a comment. I read every one. Subscribe for new stories every week. See you next time. All stories on this channel are fictional narratives created for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real persons, companies, or events is coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of family healing, personal resilience, and the courage to rebuild.